Well, this is December the 3rd. I'm doing yet another election update, and I guess this has become the topic on this channel. I guess today's discussion kind of concerns the hearings before the Michigan legislative committees that have occurred in the last couple of days. Basically, what we're seeing here is the fact that we had a lot of irregularity in the election process and counting processes, and certainly in terms of what they call poll challengers or observers, whatever, in Michigan, particularly in the Detroit area. I think was particularly intense, and it's quite clear that the Democrats were obsessed with the idea of obstructing any ability of the Republicans to effectively, participate in their legal duties and responsibilities to see if the election was carried out in a fair manner. We have as a background the ongoing Dominion debate, which is kind of evolving in various ways, which we can get to that in a little bit too. I guess a general outtake of this set of hearings is there really was a lot of irregularity and certainly a significant amount of vote fraud that was committed, and yet it's unclear to me whether or not it was a decisive factor in Michigan. I think it probably was a decisive factor in Georgia, Arizona, probably Pennsylvania. I don't know. The Michigan case is a little more iffy because of the margin of the Biden count versus the Trump count. But it's clear that at the margins, if there was any ambiguity, everything was decided in favor of Biden. And the question is exactly how much that ran up his count. There are also reports that, for instance, ballots were repeatedly ran through the Dominion machines and counted inappropriately. On the other hand, we have to look at the fact that what the absolute vote is and get some sense of the degree to which Dominion manipulation is a factor. I tend to think that this has become kind of a big deal, mainly because of the history of where it came from and the fact that it's the one thing that might, if it were proven, really overturn the outcome. It's very difficult to go through and say, well, this many dead people voted, this many people moved out of state but still voted. These people, we're not sure they really exist because they're registered at the UPS center as their home address, and we think they may be fake voters that voted, and therefore this adds up to what? And then you have the still problem. You have to make the assumption, which is probably true, of course, that they were votes for Biden. But again, can a court, without direct evidence, prove that? And because the envelopes on these mail-in ballots are separated from the ballot, it's no longer possible, because of our policy of secret votes, to trace them back with definitiveness. Now, there are some cases that have been brought up in the Michigan testimony which should be. For instance, anybody who voted for Biden, who in certain areas, whose address was, whose birth date was something like the January the 1st, 1900, or January the 1st, 2020. I think we could try to identify that, and so we can't say that they voted for Biden, but we could probably fairly subtract those votes from the Biden total if we had a court willing to do it, and so forth. But so far, we've yet to actually have definitive proof that the Dominion machine, other than one instance which was caught, has actually been flipping the votes. And when we had a hand recount in Georgia, it came out basically about the same as it did in the machine count. So now there's another machine count going on, and that'll be, but that would seem to indicate that effectively, whatever the ballots are, whether legitimate or not, they really are there. So again, what would be useful would be to look through the ballots themselves and look for evidence that the ballot itself was fraudulent, in the sense that it wasn't an official document, that it was like something that was printed off a printer with the votes already put in, so to speak, and just thrown in the stack somehow. And perhaps the other issue were Trump ballots thrown away and replaced with Biden ballots. I mean, these are possibilities, and that would require an in-depth investigation. And that's why I say when you see the statements of Attorney General Barr, what he's really saying, I think the word that was not in there was prosecutable. They've seen no prosecutable evidence of massive wide-scale voting that would affect the election, meaning not that there isn't a lot of smoke, but is there something you could actually take to a court and get a conviction at this point in time, based on what he knows now, beyond a reasonable doubt before a jury? And that's a whole different issue than let's say the common sense and, let's say, what do they call it, the preponderance of the evidence standard, which is used in tort cases. And that I think is kind of where we're kind of at this point. I think as a common sense thing, in the states I mentioned, is the fraud in all these states. Say that every state that Trump would like to have won didn't win, I think may be wrong. Michigan was a high enough margin. Now, there's a lot of irregularity in Wisconsin, and that's an ongoing case right now because I think that the recount is over, and of course there's going to be challenges in court. We'll see if they can get anywhere with that. Again, you have the problem, though, of ballots separated from the envelopes, and I don't know, is there any way to track which is which anymore? See, that's the problem. A lot of these lawsuits came way too late. If you really were going to fight these things that were done, for instance, in Wisconsin, it should have been fought before the election in court and got these particular ballots thrown out before they were ever received and counted. That is to say, the ones that were sent out inappropriately, at that point, they're still in the envelope, they're still trackable, and they still could be thrown out. Once you actually separate them from the ballots and throw them in the mix, it then becomes a much more difficult thing to do. And I think that's kind of where we are on this situation. At this time, remember, we have a completely certified election, as far as I know, for Biden. All secretaries of state have certified, I think, in all the contested states, and the other ones are going to go down in a very routine way, as I said before. So that will not change, I think. So I guess it really comes down to, will the Supreme Court try to throw this thing out based on equal protection? And I guess there is two different cases coming out of Pennsylvania that would address this. And of course, then we have the Kraken cases, which I believe there's a Michigan case, which I've heard nothing of other than it was filed. I've looked at the document. The Georgia case, which is in district court, and I'm not sure what its status is at this point. It was supposed to have a hearing tomorrow, and yet Maria Bartiromo saying yesterday, somebody made some comment about being delayed. I did a little bit of internet searching and was unable to determine whether that's correct or not. Another thing is that Sidney Powell and Lynn Wood had a rather strange little rally yesterday in which the people speaking disagreed with each other. Lynn Wood's talking about not voting for the two senators. I presume this is as a pressure tactic on the governor to call a special session of the legislature. The other people there said definitely do vote. The President Trump says to vote, and I mean, who are you going to listen to, Lynn Wood or the president if you're a Trump supporter? Trump wants you to vote for the two people because they're good, solid votes, and they're definitely votes to stop Schumer from what he's doing. And somebody I saw on Twitter said something like, by not doing this, you'll get a new election. No, you'll get a Democrat Congress, a Democrat Senate. You're not going to get anything good by not voting. And here's the thing on that, too. I want to address that real quickly. I think to some degree, the fraud that exists is limited in magnitude. And there's going to be a lot more attention, I think, in the Senate election than there was in the presidential on this issue because it's been raised so strongly. And so I think what you're going to see is that if you have a very strong Republican vote, it will be able to overwhelm the cheating. After all, we have to understand that the Senate candidate total Republican vote was higher than the Democrat candidate's vote in the presidential election. It was only Trump that fell lower, and that's because of this anti-Trump phenomenon among suburban women or whatever. In other words, these same people were also voting, in many cases were voting Republican for the lower tier candidates. And the reason they're voting against Trump is probably because of this whole Trump personality thing, which, I think it's stupid because, you really want a senile Democrat surrounded by a bunch of ultra leftists as president, or you want Trump, who's doing the right thing, but occasionally says things that maybe raise people's, concerns about propriety. But I think that's naive, but they did it. And they probably will still vote that way for Senate, and that still gives us all a comeback option that we may not have if we don't succeed in holding those seats. We're going to have a better outcome from a conservative point of view if we win those 2 seats, whatever you think of those individuals. And I think they're pretty good individuals, actually. I'd see nothing bad about either of them, really, in any meaningful sense compared to, let's say, typical politicians. In fact, anybody that's voting for idealism is not playing real politics or being foolish. The whole thing is a struggle for political power, after all. And it's about basically, do you want them running your life, or do you want to have some people that listen to you in charge? Of course, whoever you pick is going to occasionally do something you don't like. That's just the way it's going to be, no matter what happens. But there's people that are going to do a lot more that you don't like, and then there's people that'll do a little more that you don't like. And it's not so much a choice between evils. Maybe it's a choice just between 2 different outcomes that are clearly distinguishable. And I think that's the point. So if Lynn Wood's telling people not to vote, I condemn that totally. He's becoming a bit of a troublemaker in that sense. On the other hand, his lawsuit has some potential, so it's kind of a mixed bag. I wish Trump would call him up and say, hey, can you cut out this stuff about not voting? I don't know. Does Trump actually talk to any of these people, I sometimes ask? He did talk to Barr, but he only talked to Barr after Barr made the statement, for instance, and then he kind of semi-retracted it, which the way I framed it, I think is closer to the real situation. Plus, I would also point out something I put in a tweet the other day. I think the biggest problem you're having is that it's a general consensus among the U.S. attorneys that are currently in place that Biden will become president, and it means their consensus is they're quickly going to be out of a job. And therefore, they believe, given that all these law firms probably are dominated by Democrats, they're going to have a much better chance of getting a high-paying job in a prestigious law firm post being U.S. attorney than they will if they actually go out and very actively fight the fraud in the election, which doesn't say anything good about them. But I didn't ask you to vote for them, okay? They're just there, and well, but I'm just saying that may explain something, which means why I don't give any credence to the statement that they didn't find anything. I don't think they looked that hard, and for the reason I just said. So that's why that argument to me is bogus, completely bogus. So at any rate, I think that's kind of it. I hear there's going to be a hearing in Nevada today before a judge about they're getting to take depositions and stuff, so about fraud in Nevada. And it seems like they may have a fairly good case there. The problem is, of course, that's only 6 electoral votes, and if we flip 6 votes, it could be useful if we can flip some other states, but if Nevada's the only one you pull off, it's not going to, it'll just reduce Biden to 300, so that doesn't get him below 270. And finally, what is the Trump people asking? Look at the Michigan presentation. Fundamentally, they're asking the legislature to actually vote to nullify the certification of the electors that the Secretary of State and Governor have certified in Michigan, for example. And I think in other states that's also their basic request. And I guess there's 3 possibilities. One, they don't do it, which I think is most likely, just considering politicians are kind of weak and all that. 2, that they may, if they did it, they could either vote to give them to Trump, or they could simply vote that it was a contested situation and the election was defective, and therefore they weren't going to submit electors at all. The latter, I think, has the best case to actually succeed, because remember, if they do this, there'll be a court challenge to what they did, and who knows where the Supreme Court will rule on that one. if it gets there. And I suppose that one would get there, or it gets into Congress and so forth. So I think not sending electors is probably the best bet, and throw it into the House and Senate, where I think we could win. So that's sort of what I've got today. I know this is an ongoing process, but we're getting late in the game. I mean, after all, next Tuesday is the date that the safe harbor law takes effect and the electors have been selected. And as some people on radio I heard the other day didn't seem to understand, it's not one set of electors that's turned to vote one way or the other. The electors will pretty much vote the way they're supposed to, because they're all hardcore political activists of the respective parties. So the Biden electors are hardcore Democrats, the Republican electors are hardcore Republicans. They're going to vote the right way, I think, pretty much, if they're selected. So that's not an issue, really. I mean, there is the issue of the faithless elector who deviates from that. It rarely happens, and usually it happens when it doesn't matter. I mean, for instance, in the last election, 7 of them did it. 5 Hillary electors, I think, went for the Green candidate, I believe, and 2 Trump electors went for, I think, the Libertarian. But that was already a situation where it wouldn't affect the outcome. And I think that's generally the history of these faithless electors. It usually is protest votes when it doesn't affect the outcome. So I doubt anything's going to happen that will affect this outcome at the moment. So that's sort of the way it is. Keep you updated. I'm still looking to hear what's happened with the Michigan, Sidney Powell lawsuit, and now there's a new one, I think, in Arizona. So we'll wait and see if few of those gain traction. So if you like these videos, again, give me a like on YouTube. That helps. And if you have an account, subscribe. I'm getting some more subscriptions I'm seeing lately, and I appreciate that. And you can always forward links to friends and so forth. And I tend to post these on Twitter and Parler and so forth. So that's all for today.